Visit Elmhurst.org to explore the new City of Elmhurst website. Find out the latest Elmhurst news, pay utility bills and parking tickets, report concerns, and much more. Elmhurst.org is an ideal way to discover what Elmhurst offers your business, your family, your life.
Are you looking for the perfect cultural escape? Would you like to experience art in beautiful galleries that's not intimidating and welcoming for you and your family? Then come to the Elmhurst Art Museum. Located in beautiful Wilder Park, only 15 miles west of Chicago, and right next to the Metro West train line, this contemporary museum offers a variety of exhibitions and programs, public tours, guest lectures, and art classes for the entire family. Come take a closer look at the Elmhurst Art Museum. For more information, call 630-834-0202 or visit our website at elmhurstartmuseum.org.
Welcome to another edition of Elmhurst Now. I'm Ken Bartels from the Community Bank of Elmhurst, your host, and tonight we're talking about the Elmhurst Art Museum, that jewel that sits on the fringe of Wilder Park. And to do that, we have Phyllis O'Neill, the Executive Director, Stacy Boris, the Chief Curator, and Jason Piat, a sculptor and an artist associated with the museum and an Elmhurst resident. And I would welcome all of you to Elmhurst Now. And I want to start with a question for all three of you, and that is if you might share your personal, professional backgrounds, and then how long you've been involved with the Elmhurst Art Museum. And Phyllis, why don't we start with you?
Okay. I've been here at the Elmhurst Art Museum for almost 4.5 years now. And I came from the East Coast, born in New York City. Moved to Vermont, lived in Maine, and so the Midwest was new territory for me to explore. My husband and I had been partners in various arts and cultural organizations. We presented concerts and worked in schools and did some really interesting, fascinating work with immigrants, and so that's what we were doing in Maine. And we moved here because of my husband. I followed him. He's the director of the
Old Town.
Thank you. Right, Old Town School of Folk Music in
Sure.
Lincoln Square, Chicago. Yeah.
So you set out to prove that there is life west of the Appalachians.
In the suburbs,
Yes.
yes, right, and in the suburbs, and there is. This is a really lively town. So I come with an arts background and a studio background. I also work in clay and have an active studio.
Excellent, thank you. Stacy?
Yeah, I've been with the Elmhurst Art Museum for 2 years. And prior to that, I worked in art museums in Chicago for almost 20 years. So I've been in the museum field for quite a long time. I started my career at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, where I worked for 13 years, and then went to Spertus Museum to open the new museum in their new building, and worked there for 5 years. And I have an art history background, a museum studies background, and I'm a Midwestern girl. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and but I've lived in Chicago since the early 1990s.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I have to comment on this. Midwesterners feel compelled to say,
Proud
I'm
of
from
it.
Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
Because
Is there another?
they're afeared that they may not be talking to someone who knows where
knows where it
Milwaukee is. Jason, what about your background? And I know you're from the city, moved out here.
Right. We've lived in Elmhurst going on 3 years. Moved out here from the city. I'm originally from Green Bay, Wisconsin.
There you go.
It's in Wisconsin. And I moved here to go to college in early 90s as well, to go to DePaul University. And then went up to Northern Illinois University in DeKalb to do my master's. I have a master's in sculpture. And I've been teaching and practicing artist. I'm a professor at Harper College, further out into the suburbs. And as far as my affiliation with the museum, I had not my first solo show, but I think my first good show at the Elmhurst Art Museum back in 2003, 2002, so somewhat in there. My first sort of big show after graduate school, and I've been sort of kept in touch and loosely affiliated with the museum since.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. The art museum is a wonderful piece of the cultural fabric, and one of the things that sets Elmhurst apart from other communities, all of whom are wonderful places, I'm sure, but at the same time, it's a relatively recent addition to the Elmhurst community by some of the standards in town. When did the art museum open? And I know not necessarily direct involvement, but when did it open, and why do you think that was an important day for Elmhurst? Phyllis,
Well, Elmhurst Art Museum was an idea for a number of years before the museum itself opened, and it was started by a group of people with the Elmhurst Artists Guild, and its champion was Eleanor King Hookham. And I believe the museum opened in its current building in 1997, thank you. But before that it was in a schoolhouse, and I believe in a building of the park districts. So I know Stacy's been studying up on this.
Well, I know that the Elmhurst Fine Arts and Civic Center Foundation was started in the 1970s, and Eleanor King Hookham had had this dream of having a museum in Elmhurst since she moved there in the 1940s. So it was a long haul to get there, but it's pretty incredible that she and her supporters and the other art lovers in town were able to actually achieve the opening, 50 years later. But the foundation started in 1974, and then the Elmhurst Art Museum opened in Eldridge School in 1981. And then a couple years later, it moved into a community center, and not until 1997 did the current building open. And then in between that, they purchased the Mies van der Rohe house, the McCormick House, designed by Mies van der Rohe, and moved it to Wilder Park, and then created the current building around that incredible, that architectural landmark.
Well, the name Eleanor King Hookham, of course, will be familiar to many of our viewers. Internationally acclaimed artist in town for many, many, many years. An inductee into the Elmhurst Chamber Civic Hall of Fame. Just an exquisite woman, and someone that actively shared herself with the community. And this was something that when she first proposed it, my guess is that there probably were all sorts of raised eyebrows and rolling eyes and a great deal of skepticism. And considering how long it took, that was probably all justified. But no one was going to tell her that it wasn't going to happen. She just didn't know when it was going to happen. And the whole process of acquiring the land and vacating streets and dealing with just the whole land swaps. I think you described her before we went on air as kind of a horse trader.
Yeah, I did, and I mean that in the best way. When she saw a deal and she could make it happen, she moved in quickly. I understand she bought and sold a lot of property, and at some point the Park District got involved, and it was in the end a great swap that happened to make the museum.
Well, and individuals in town who were fortunate enough to snap up some of her coffee paintings.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, those folks.
Well, many of the individuals in Elmhurst have them, and we have quite a few ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of that having been said, as I understand it, when the museum opened in 1997, the Mies van der Rohe home, which obviously has its own uniqueness and historical significance, were the offices, as I recall, or as I believe I recall. Now I understand that that's not the case. The museum is using them for other purposes, and this is a slight digression from the order of things,
Right.
but
That's okay.
how is it organized now?
Well, that's partly true.
Right.
When the museum opened in 1997, half of the McCormick House was used for the administrative offices, and those offices are still in half of the McCormick House. The other half was used as a kind of
administrative meeting
room, and kind of meant to be like a media center for lectures and things like that. A couple years, since Phyllis has gotten here, and then since I came on board originally as a consultant to help kind of organize an exhibition in the space, we've been really actively using the house as an exhibition space, kind of a hybrid museum, changing exhibitions, house museum. So it retains its character as a architectural, important architectural structure from the 1950s, has mid-century modern furniture, but it also has changing exhibitions that relate to our exhibitions in our galleries, but also site-specific exhibitions by contemporary artists who are responding to the modernist architecture. We like to continue this conversation between the historic and the current.
Shame on any of our viewers who don't know this, but I'm going to ask you to, if I walk in the front door of the Elmhurst Art Museum, give me a quick, sketchy tour of what I'm going to find. Not necessarily the exhibit, but the space itself.
Well, what I like to do when people come to see the museum, and visitors we want to impress, of course, when they come in the front door, the first thing they see is this very beautiful open gallery space. And I start with our education center because I think that education is the foundation of much of what we do and is very important to art and to appreciating art. So we recently were able to expand our education center, and it's now several studios, as we call them, has a big mural by one of the artists who exhibited at the museum. We have literally several hundred classes and camps a year. Our student population has grown and doubled and then doubled again this year. So I think that there's a real need in Elmhurst. Okay, then we move out and go down a long hallway, and to the right there is a permanent gallery for the Elmhurst Art Guild, and so they have a space to exhibit the work of their members, and sometimes they have shows for other artists. So then you come back into this beautiful big space that's airy and light, and was designed by the architect who came in to work with the Mies House and to really create an integrated building. From the large space, which now has exhibitions almost all the time, whether sculptural or sometimes 2D, and right now hanging gardens, which we can tell you more about later. There are 3 galleries, and that's along the north wall, and then a walkway, a pathway, and at a certain point you take a step and you're in the Mies House, and then things change up a little. You want to go from there?
The whole building is glass and steel, and the McCormick House, designed by Mies, is all glass and steel, as was his most of his architecture. And so the contemporary architects use that format and those materials for the rest of the museum. So almost all of the walls are floor-to-ceiling windows, except for the 3 museum galleries, which have 20-foot ceilings, or almost 25-foot ceilings.
And
they have incredible soaring ceilings, which is wonderful for contemporary art. And we also discovered that there's clear-story windows on either side, so we can open up the shades and let in natural light in exhibitions that will permit that. And what I think happens when people walk in the door of the Elmhurst Art Museum is that their socks are knocked off. I really think it's surprising. I don't think people expect the Elmhurst Art Museum to look like it looks. It's incredibly elegant and beautiful and professional. It looks like an urban, metropolitan, international art museum.
And it's extremely intimate. And
that in its size is, intimate. It can be gone through in an hour or so, and there's, quite a few exhibitions happening, and there's lots of different spaces to explore. And then there's the Mies van der Rohe house, which makes it incredibly unique.
Now, within Elmhurst, we have the Elmhurst Art Museum, we've got the Elmhurst Historical Museum, we have the Lazadra Museum of Lapidary Art, and we even have the Theater Historical Society of America museum or gallery. I didn't do extensive research, but I think that's a little unusual for a western suburban community of Chicago or probably any place else.
I think it's totally unique, and I have done some research on that because very often in grant applications, we're able to say that the Midwestern or the southern suburb of Elmhurst, has this grouping of museums, and no other suburb in Chicago even has an art museum. So we're alone in that, and the Lapidary Arts Museum is one of the only ones in the country, or is it the only one?
I'm not sure, but it's certainly unusual and interesting.
And Jason, as an artist, what surprised you about the Elmhurst Art Museum the first time you were exposed to it?
I think, like Stacy said, the architecture, number one, not of the house per se, but of the entire structure. Because if you imagine what you expect a suburban art museum, which there are almost none of, but a suburban art center, a suburban art gallery to be, it's typically an old house, right? It's typically, or some sort of repurposed building or something like that. And the Elmhurst Art Museum is clearly a museum design, a building designed to be a museum. It looks like an art museum. It displays art wonderfully, as a good museum should, and it just doesn't seem like it belongs in the suburbs. And it's great that it is there.
How did you find it, or how did it find you 10, 12 years ago, whenever exactly it was?
I actually had a friend who was preparing work for a show, Mark Arctander. You guys, and his work is in the collection of the museum, and he was a friend from graduate school and from teaching, and he asked me to help him install his show, and in the time of installing, I got to talk to the curator a little bit, and she asked about my work, and a couple of years later I ended up with a show there myself. So.
And then many years later, you moved there.
And then many years later, strangely, I ended up moving within walking distance of there as well. So it's one of the, I think, one of the institutions or the entities that really sets Elmhurst apart from most of the other suburbs, because it just is such an anomaly to have an art museum in the suburbs and to have a serious art museum.
Yeah, I've heard Mayor Morley refer to Elmhurst as more than the sum of its parts, which is kind of an interesting way of describing it. Well, from a math perspective, it doesn't work, but every other way it does. There's so much more here than necessarily meets the eye when you look you look at the community. But how much of a unique draw all by itself is the Mies van der Rohe house?
Interesting question. I think we know when somebody's come to the Mies house specifically to see it, because they are usually bent over with a camera and very, very close to the windows in the house because of the way they were designed and built. It is a draw for people architects and designers who come from all over the world. And as it becomes more and more known for the mid-century piece it is, the beautiful house that it is, there's more and more interest. In fact, we now belong to a house museum consortium, so that things are starting to bubble up for museums and houses, and we're a rare mid-century house.
Well, with the Frank Lloyd Wright homes nearby, it's probably kind of the area becomes a destination for folks that have specific interest. And I think right from the very beginning, Ray Fick and his wife, former mayor of Elmhurst, who lived in the house just down the street from where it is now. I can remember at the time marveling at the dismantlement and movement of the house to its position on the fringe of Wilder Park, and of course that preceded the new library and a few other things, which has completely changed that end of of that part of Elmhurst.
We have a great little video, and you can see the parade that formed around the two trucks that carried the museum across town, and it was really quite something.
How much collaboration, maybe the wrong word, how much cooperation, better word, between the museum entities in town? I know there's a tourism group that talks about promotion and joint promotions, and I know that there's a museum day when the trolley bus goes around, but this is an open-ended question, I'll grant you, do museums generally see themselves as birds of a feather, or is everybody sort of out there by themselves?
I think more and more we are seeing a lot of collaboration. We're reaching out to the other museums and finding, ways that we can join forces to either do an event or, bring people to see all the museums, to be able to offer educational programming. So we work with the library very carefully, and Stacy can tell you a little bit about that. Stacy has been very proactive in working with other groups in town.
Yeah, I really enjoy partnering with other institutions. I mean, especially in Wilder Park, where there's so many institutions right within walking distance. If someone is coming to the museum, once they've gone through the museum, I always send people to the other museums or the library, which I spend a lot of time at myself. And I think personally we've all gotten, we've made an effort to get to know, the other staffs at the museums and the library. We have a book group that we do with the library that's related to all of our exhibitions. We choose a book that's related to the content or the theme of an exhibition, and then we have the book discussion in the McCormick House. So we actually sit in the McCormick House on the Friday night. It's absolutely beautiful, wonderful. It's like having a book group in your house, but you're actually in a house designed by Mies van der Rohe with museum objects around you. And with the glass windows and the kind of dusk light coming in, it's just phenomenal. And we have a couple regulars who come to all of our book groups, and then we have new people who come from all over actually for the book group. So I love that program. And then we also have the library staff do children's programming at the museum related to the exhibitions as well. And in our current exhibition, which is a pretty sprawling, ambitious exhibition by artist Heidi Norton, we've collaborated and partnered with the Lizadro Museum, and she's actually borrowed 20 stones and minerals from the Lizadro Museum and included those in her installation, along with live plants and art objects and books and all sorts of other really interesting objects that relate to architecture, nature, and photography. And we worked with the Park District on this exhibition as well. So, I also know the people at the Historical Museum,
Sure.
and we share pedestals and things like that, and Lance Tauser, who works there, has been really gracious and generous in providing advice for vendors and things like that. So I think there's, a very collegial relationship among the institutions.
I'm going to stop you there because we need to take a break. But when we come back, Jason, I'm going to start with you, and I'll be interested in knowing your answer to the question: what goes into having an exhibit, if from the artist's perspective?
Okay.
We'll be right back. This is Elmhurst Now. We're talking about the Elmhurst Art Museum, one of the many jewels of Elmhurst. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for the perfect cultural escape? Would you like to experience art in beautiful galleries that's not intimidating and welcoming for you and your family? Then come to the Elmhurst Art Museum, located in beautiful Wilder Park, only 15 miles west of Chicago and right next to the Metro West train line. This contemporary museum offers a variety of exhibitions and programs, public tours, guest lectures, and art classes for the entire family. Come take a closer look at the Elmhurst Art Museum. For more information, call 630-834-0202 or visit our website at elmhurstartmuseum.org.
Welcome back to Elmhurst Now. I'm Ken Bartels, and I'm here with Phyllis O'Neill, Stacy Boris, and Jason Piat. I apologize for that. It's a absolutely wonderful place, the Elmhurst Art Museum. We've been learning about its history, but now we're going to become a bit more current. But before we go too current, Jason, I posed a question to you as an artist. The negotiations are over. You're going to have a personal show at the Elmhurst Art Museum. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think that means a lot of different things to a lot of different artists based on your practice and how you work. I'm particularly slow, and whatever the opposite of prolific is, I'm not sure. But it takes me quite a while. I generally, a lot of artists work, continuously work and continue this large body of work, and then when an exhibition opportunity comes along, they sort of, pull from that. I work towards exhibitions or projects because much of my work is site-specific or in some way in reaction to the space that it's in. And so I have a hard time making work if I don't know where it's going. So because of that, I need a lot of lead time, and especially for something as big as a solo show in the galleries at Elmhurst, which are pretty large. So that show took me about 2 years to make the work.
Wow.
And along with the rest of my life, I'm not a full-time artist, so part of the reason I'm as slow as I am, I guess. But then once I have a project, a solo exhibition like that, that's I'm very focused and work towards that, and tons of visits to the space and a lot of time spent in the space, just sort of getting a feel for it because it so much affects the work.
That I have to say, as someone not versed necessarily in your side of the culture, that really surprises me.
The time frame?
Well, not so much time frame, but that you had to create the art for the show or the exhibit as opposed to already having it and picking, if you will,
Right.
what you wanted to have in the show. I would guess that most people unfamiliar with the process would say that a little surprising.
Well, I think for a painter, that might be much easier to continue working like that. But because the majority of my work is sculpture and site-specific installation, the site is key to the work. So I have to work for
Certainly.
the space, for
Sure.
the show or for the project. So it's sort of a different way of working. So I guess I'm not completely typical as far as artists preparing for solo projects, but that's how it works for me.
Would the two of you, sustain that that's a little unusual, or is it not that unusual and I'm the one that's out to lunch on this?
I mean, there's both methods of working. I think with contemporary artists, and since probably the 1970s, there have been a lot of artists who've responded to the space, or installation artists. Installation art was kind of a thing that happened where you would walk into a space and you were immersed in the space, and artists would create environments, and they weren't discrete objects. And that was, I worked on an exhibition of installation art in the early 1990s. So by that time, that was a pretty well-known way for artists to work. That's not to say that artists weren't also working in the more traditional sense, but many artists like to respond to the spaces. And there's a lot of interest in architecture and in the environment and how that affects you, and a move away from the object. Although Jason's work is both an object but also creates an environment as he works with sculpture, but light is a very important component in his work.
Certainly.
And so light creates shadow and effects in the environment, and so that is where the light comes from and how it interacts with his sculpture. Is dependent on what the room or what the site looks like. And I know that
Right.
because I've worked with Jason on several exhibitions now at the museum.
In the this winter, we had an exhibition called Spotlight, and Jason had a piece in Spotlight, and it was probably one of the most noted exhibitions because it lit up the park. And in the
Yes.
Central Gallery, there was an installation made for that space, and it just cast again just duplicate images right through the park and joined with another neon sculpture behind it. So it was really otherworldly, but that was made for the space. And
Yeah, many of the works in Spotlight, I'd say about half of them were made specifically for the space, and others were borrowed, they're already existing. And so I think it happens quite often, but then yet there are still other artists working in that method, yeah.
Well, from the artistic side, back, if you will, for a moment to the structural side, and how is the Elmhurst Art Museum governed? How is that set up?
We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we have a board of directors who are really responsible for their fiduciarily responsible, but they're also responsible for making sure that the museum is mission centric and is able to continue into the future. So they are the governing body, and then we have a staff, and it's a small staff. There are 5 of us right now. Most of us are part-time, but of course Stacy is our chief curator. We have an education director. We have a museum services coordinator. We have a financial director, and marketing and development, and then me.
Certainly. Okay. All right. We mentioned Heidi Norton. I know there's also a Life Loggers exhibit, so let's take a few minutes and talk about the 2 exhibits that are there right now and will be for a while longer. So let's start with Life Loggers, which may be a bit more familiar than Heidi's program.
It's a group exhibition called Life Loggers, Chronicling the Everyday, and it contains work by 13 artists from around the country. And it centers on this idea of documenting one's life or archiving one's life. And each artist selects a very personal or specific aspect of their life or of their environment and really charts or tracks or maps that kind of data. Makes it sound kind of scientific, but
it's not.
I mean, well, the data, in some instances it is very regimented and rigid and quite a commitment to log or track something every single day. But then it's that data, that information is used to create unbelievably interesting, visually interesting, aesthetically interesting sculptures, paintings, drawings, installations, and video. And so you wouldn't necessarily look at these sculptures and think, oh, that's so scientific, or but some of them do have references to charts or graphs and things like that. But
latitudes and longitudes.
Right. One artist, for instance, Stephen Cartwright, who's from Illinois, tracks his latitude, longitude, and elevation every hour of every day.
I remember reading that.
And
yes.
then he creates these pretty incredible kinetic sculptures that use that data, and the graphs kind of move in this beautiful undulating wave that you wouldn't necessarily know relates to that particular data. There are these beautiful abstractions that are formed from the different items in a person's pantry, or the different colors used by different retail organizations, circulars, so that kind of charts the way advertisers or businesses try to attract people or sell their products. So it's both a log of that person's consumption, but also of how businesses try to make us consume. And then there's very personal, diaristic or journalistic type of artwork, where one artist photographed herself, made a Polaroid photograph of herself every single day for 15 years. And so not only does it document her life for 15 years, it also documents the Polaroid, because it had to end in 2009 when
They stopped
Polaroid stopped
the film.
making the
Yes.
film. So an interesting thing to track on two different levels. Is a very intimate, very beautiful way of documenting your own life and making a portrait that is across time. It's not a portrait of
lapse.
right. It's not a portrait of one moment of your life and that stands in for your whole life. It's actually incorporating process and time in portraiture. And another painter does the same thing by painting a small self-portrait every single day for 365 days on these small little cubes. So there's a lot of really interesting.
There's 13.
There's
in the
13
exhibit?
artists. One artist uses weather data to create these very colorful, beautiful sculptures, which she also translates into musical compositions. So there are different approaches and different media that these artists use to log their everyday lives. And often it's not this dramatic moment that they're trying to track, but it's really ordinary moments of everyday life, which actually make up much more of your life than these dramatic moments. And so it's kind of an homage to how we live our lives on a daily basis, seeing beauty in the ordinary and in the everyday. It's a really interesting exhibition that touches on a lot of different relevant subjects that we talk about today, especially through the use of social media and posting things every day online or on Facebook, and with wearable devices where you can track your heartbeat and your steps and things like that.
I'll ask this question that I asked Jason. Did you find this exhibit, or did this exhibit find you?
Well, since I've been there for 2 years, I have organized every exhibition that we've had except for this one. I needed a break. But I learned about this exhibition through my relationship with other curators, and it was curated by two outside curators, one from Pittsburgh and one from New York, and it was curated it was organized for Carleton College in Minnesota. And I got in touch with the curator at Carleton, and Phyllis and I went to Minnesota in the middle of winter to see the exhibition, and
Good for you.
we were able to work out bringing the exhibition. It wasn't actually going to travel anywhere, so we were able to extend the life of the exhibition and bring it to Elmhurst. And it fits into our galleries beautifully. The curators were able to come and give a tour, and some of the artists were able to come to the opening, and several of them, are coming to give talks and things like that. And one is coming to do a performance actually in August.
Jason, have you seen it?
Yeah, it's an outstanding show. I think it's really interesting that it's an ambitious show on multiple levels. The work is extremely ambitious on these artists' parts. I mean, documenting
Absolutely.
something every hour of your life is a serious commitment. But I think that it's a very ambitious show to have here at a small suburban museum. I think it's the kind of show. It's a challenging show. It's the kind of art that's in there is, not typical, not what the average person outside of the art world imagines when they visualize a piece of art, or what is behind, or the concepts behind a piece of art. So I think it's really going to sort of expand people's understanding of the breadth of art that's being made, and I think that makes it interesting in its location, being in a small museum. And I think that's what makes this museum great. Is it sort of maybe more so under new management and staff and curating than it has in the past, but it's sort of pushing those boundaries while still serving the community as well. And it has to do that, and that's a hard thing to do.
I think, bouncing off of that, we are very committed to presenting work that is interesting and maybe unexpected in a setting, like Elmhurst Art Museum. But we're also committed to making it accessible. And I think one of Stacy's great abilities is to take work that you might not normally think of as the everyday work, or it's not only pictures of things you might recognize, but the format that we exhibit in really engages the viewer, and it seems perfectly natural.
And the Heidi Norton exhibit. You mentioned it briefly a few
Right.
minutes ago.
And along the lines of what we were talking about earlier about creating site-specific work, we have, over the last couple of years, and will continue to commission artists to create new works in our spaces. And that happens sometimes as part of a larger exhibition, or it happens like with Heidi's exhibition, which is a solo presentation, which was just supposed to be kind of in one small space, but expanded in an incredibly sprawling way through all the rest of the spaces in the museum. It includes 5 different sections. In the large entry Hostetler gallery, she created these incredible window panels that are made of resin and photographs and actual live plants. They're kind of like stained glass, but you can see through them. You can see the Wilder Park, and then you can see the plants that are part of her sculptures, which will go through their own life cycle and change and
Certainly.
transform throughout
Right.
throughout the time. And it brings the outside in and takes the inside out, and it really creates this wonderful relationship between interior and exterior, which is an important concept of her work, and also relates to our architecture. I mean, that's exactly what happens when you have a building that's primarily glass. You know, the exterior is part of the interior, and the whole experience is mixed together. She invited 3 other artists to show their work, other artists who have interest in modern architecture and also the relationship to nature. And she created a trading post, which is an area that's meant for people to gather at, the community and visitors, to kind of dialogue about gardening and art. And so she's put a number of objects, live plants, slides, books, and things there. And the rule is that if you would like to take something, you may, but you have to put something back in return. So it's meant to be this, a trading post of sorts,
Certainly.
and also a place for gathering. And then she created a whole installation in the McCormick House. Mises' dictum is less is more, and there definitely is more is more,
More is more.
going on in
Yeah.
the Mises House now. It's really completely transformed the way it's looked over the past couple years. The furniture is still there, but there are lots of live plants. There are these specimens from the Lizadro Museum. There are books, there are artwork by other artists. It's really a fantastic hybrid space, which she calls a combination sunroom, greenhouse, museum, and living room. And it's meant to kind of be a space of light and knowledge. And it's meant, people are meant to sit down and read all the books and articles and things, and look around and, kind of
encourage you to stay and
just
get
kind of
the
hang
full-
out in the
get
space.
the full experience.
Yeah.
Right.
There is one more part of this exhibition, which is called a camera obscura. And Heidi and her posse built a small shed, and it is set up inside with a lens. And when you go inside and look on the wall, the light reflects in such a way, but the images outside are upside down. So if you're inside the shed, the camera itself, and somebody outside is dancing, you will see that particular image reflected inside.
Terrific.
it's like being inside of a camera.
We're going to run out of time before we know it, and I want to make sure this is your summer brochure.
Right.
You
Yes,
already know
it
that.
is.
Very quickly, and I mean pretty quickly. What goes on in the summer, or what is going on in the summer?
Exhibitions. The 2 exhibitions that we've been talking about. We have a new art camp, starting every week. In fact, 3 start every week, one for slightly older kids and one for younger kids in the morning and the afternoon. Are your kids there? All right.
They'll be there.
It's become extremely popular. They're making art all day long, 5 days a week, so it's very active and energetic. So that's the other part. You'll see campers all around.
The education and the campers and the
And
exhibit.
workshops
Programs related to
right.
the exhibitions. Heidi Norton is leading a number of workshops and a tour around Elmhurst of the natural history of Elmhurst. And Renato Umali, who's one of the artists and life loggers, is doing a performance related to his work in the exhibition. And there is never a lack of things to do, really, at Elmhurst Art Museum. We're open late on Fridays till 8 p.m., so that's
Fridays
a
are
good time
free
to come.
day.
Fridays are free day, and we often have our programs on Friday nights. We have so we have a lot of programs going on.
Okay. So as a close, if I'm either a lifelong resident or brand new to Elmhurst, what's the website as the fastest way to find out what there is going on?
elmhurstartmuseum.org.
Okay.
And in fact, we'll be unveiling a new website within another month or so.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much.
You're
I
welcome.
warned you
Thank
that
you.
the time goes by quickly, but I appreciate all three of you sharing your stories.
Thanks
Thank
very
Thank
much.
you very
Ken.
much.
So
Thanks for having
Jason
us.
and Phyllis and Stacy, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
This has been Elmhurst Now. We've been talking about the Elmhurst Art Museum. If you haven't been there, you need to go there. If you've gone there before, it's time to go again. I'm Ken Bartels. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.
We live in some of the best communities in Illinois. We care about our neighbors. We work hard to preserve our quality of life. But there's something we forget about in Elmhurst. A river runs through it, and it's up to us to protect it. Our storm drains flow to Salt Creek, and that means our harmful waste does too. So try using fewer chemicals on your lawn. Avoid leaking fluids from cars. And grow native flowers and plants to absorb more rainwater. Don't muddy the waters. Do your part to clean up Salt Creek.
Are you looking for the perfect cultural escape? Would you like to experience art in beautiful galleries that's not intimidating and welcoming for you and your family? Then come to the Elmhurst Art Museum, located in beautiful Wilder Park, only 15 miles west of Chicago and right next to the Metro West train line. This contemporary museum offers a variety of exhibitions and programs, public tours, guest lectures, and art classes for the entire family. Come take a closer look at the Elmhurst Art Museum. For more information, call 630-834-0202 or visit our website at elmhurstartmuseum.org.